966.
We're excited to be speaking now with Todd Albert Nims. Todd is a creative producer and writer-director heavily involved in Saudi Arabia's cinema and entertainment development. He co-produced the major feature film Born a King, which I finally saw for the first time on my flight home from Riyadh a few days ago. It is fantastic. Shot in London and in Saudi Arabia, which broke box office records for the Gulf. He held the film producer position at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's state-of-the-art hub for inspiring creativity and global culture, Ithra, for 6 years, where he established the kingdom's first cinema and assisted in launching the first Saudi Film Days program. Really cool. Mr. Nims also owns an entertainment company based in Riyadh. He also sits as chairman of the Arts, Culture, and Entertainment Committee for AmCham KSA. Todd, welcome to the 966. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Heard lots about the 966.
Yeah, I was delighted when I reached out to you and you said, "Oh yeah, I know all about it." So I hope it's good things.
I mean, it's reminded me of. I'm thinking like there's probably a phrase that's gonna start popping up here, like, "What's the 966?" Kind of like give me the info on what's going on. You know?
That's true.
I'm gonna start that. Yeah. I'm gonna start that trend. That's
new.
That's when that comes up.
It's an updated. What's the 411?
Yeah, that's
the 966.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. The updated 411, because no one uses 411 anymore. It's Google. So yeah, what's the 966?
That's genius. Awesome. An early Christmas
You're
present
welcome.
for us, Richard. Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah. Unfortunately, here in
why they pay me the big bucks.
And actually, Todd, it was time, I guess. We had sort of circled you, and I mentioned when I invited you to join us on the 966 that I had you in mind very early because you're kind of a mythic figure, and I say that because we cover here sort of the flowering of some of the art and culture scene in Saudi Arabia over the last 5 years, and we've had people on talk about the comedy scene. We talk about cinema. We regularly, do our one big things and yellas on artistic changes. And I think you refer to it as a new cycle. But it's kind of a fascinating. When I say mythic figure, if you go back on things in the comedy scene, for example, and you go back to the early aughts, 2008, 9, 10, 11, whatever, you were very much involved in the comedy scene, the underground comedy scene. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean. So if you took a picture of that, a snapshot of that time, Todd Albert Nims would be in there. Same thing with the cinema. You one of the very first, your 2007, feature film really on Aramco brats, was again a sort of a groundbreaking thing that could be done and could be done commercially viably. And again, you go back to snapshot of cinema, and this is again all pre Vision 2030, and there is Todd Albert Nims in this picture. and you're trying now. It looks like you're doing the same thing with theater. As it grows and it sort of regenerates in Saudi Arabia, there is Todd Albert Nims right at the founding, sort of, and it's really been fascinating. And what I'd hope you might do with us today is you're a Aramco brat, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Clearly, Saudi Arabia is in your DNA. Clearly, storytelling is in your DNA. And I'd like to maybe, if you could take us on a journey from your time as an Aramco brat in the Dhahran compound, which I've always thought would be an amazing place to grow up. I always thought it was like one big adventure camp for kids. And then, you went to University of Colorado to study communications. You did a time at Harvard on storytelling. It's clearly been, it's a big part of you. And obviously that's been now, combined with Saudi Arabia. So maybe if you could take us on that journey out of Dhahran, to the U.S. and back to sort of be, like I said, a ground zero at these artistic renaissance for Saudi Arabia in so many ways across any number of sectors.
Okay, wow. I think I have never had a better intro and felt more understood before I even started talking than what you guys just did right now. So my hat is off to you guys. Do your research. Wow, impressive.
Like I said, you're a mythic figure.
Yeah. So how early do you want me to? So you want me to sort of give you like how I got into it, or you want me to start? Where do you want me to start?
Exactly. Well, talk about talk about your journey. And clearly this is meaningful to you, and you want to tell stories, and you think there's great stories in Saudi Arabia. And this all when did this first occur to you, that you were sort of in a place that was really rich, and was as a source to feed your passion?
It's interesting. So I think being born overseas in Saudi and kind of growing up with that awareness of being, we were sort of here till I was 5 in Saudi, and then I left for 5 years and then came back. And in the 5 years I left, we were actually living at NASA Space Center, which is like literally all my friends were astronauts. So it was like a different kind of thinking about the world as this huge place. And I mean, it really did at that age give me a perspective on how small we are. And so it started like this unique place, and then being in this place, and then going back to Saudi. And then that's when the Gulf War broke out. So we kind of did this journey like there, then evacuated, and all these little pieces kind of I mean, even the Gulf War, it made me see the world in a different perspective, because it was kind of, in a way, a war is a big story. It's kind of this, you become us versus them, and then you all kind of combine, and you see the power of kind of joining together, and then sort of that feeling, and then coming back to the U.S. and then sort of having to always be telling people say, where are you from? You say, well, I'm American, but I was born in Saudi, and they kind of always having to tell these stories, and then having to explain the Gulf War, for example. And I remember the song of "Stand Tall, Stand Proud, Voices that Care Crying Out Loud." This song that was made by Hollywood for the Gulf War, and instead of learning it back then, and then sort of when I came to the States and sort of singing that to people, and then people going, "What are you singing? What are you talking about?" And realizing, oh my God, that was a story just for us over there. It wasn't a story for the rest of the country. And just seeing kind of how that affected our lives. It's funny. I remember when that happened, actually, one of the very first things I thought when that happened, when I came, I was out in the desert in Khafji, which is on the border between Kuwait and Saudi. I was 10. And we were with these soldiers, and there was that song being played on monitors, "Stand Tall, Stand Proud." Madonna and Mike Tyson, all these people were singing this song for the soldiers. And then there was like Johnny's mom on there saying, "Johnny, we can't wait for you to come back." And all these cuts in and out of like soldiers' parents. There's guys next to me, grown men, breaking down and crying. And we just all felt this unity. And then I remember coming to the States, evacuating, and being in a different part of Texas, Victoria, Texas. And people asking me, and me singing this song, I'm thinking they were going to know what I was talking about. And the moment they had this blank look on their face, and they said, what are you singing? I didn't even think about myself. First thing I thought was, oh my God, what about these soldiers that I was thinking, what would it be like for them to feel that, come back and have this? I was like, oh my God, it must be. It's kind of like, I think when people talk about PTSD and just like the different reality of coming back. I kind of had that at an early age. And I think that process of going back and forth and seeing the different kind of narratives, and then seeing how much sort of culture and the story, like societal stories, and how, you hear growing, the story of religions, like for example of Christianity and then Islam, and I had a Buddhist friend, and hearing those stories, and then later on kind of I don't know, sort of getting into indigenous culture, because I lived abroad. I went to university in Colorado, as you said, but then I did a year abroad in Australia, and I kind of did Aboriginal studies. Then I was like, did this whole year out, and I started living with Aborigines. I did with Aborigines in Australia, then in Africa, and then in Hawaii. I spent a whole living with shamans out there. So I kind of did all this. I got way outside of society. And I think part of it was I was trying to figure out where society ended and then I began. And I think the moment that I got the farthest outside of society was when I was with these Aborigines in Arnhem Land, which is kind of like the reservations that are there for Australian, kind of like the way we have Indian reservations in America. And I was able to go there, and they let me go on this part that was not for foreigners of their beach. And it was just this beautiful part of like just gorgeous beach, the kind of beach and area that people spend their whole year to take 2 weeks to go to, working.
Right.
And I was out there and I was alone. And I said, this is the peak of what I'm supposed to be. Like, this is where people work all year to go. And I just realized, you know what? I think the best moments of my life are actually when I was with people and part of someone else's story and like kind of being with others. And that's when I started reintroducing myself to society, getting back inside and wanting to find out, what our narrative is and how I could contribute to it. And it took me a long time. I finally went back. Whenever I was in, I kind of went, that's what I did, spend some time in Hawaii, still kind of tracing those roots out, but then ended up in Boston before I went back to university, and then 9/11 happened. And that kind of, again, another grand narrative, and then sort of hearing about Saudis and having sort of these passports drop out of the sky. And I was just like, and then again, people getting this different attitude towards my story, which was like, oh, American, but born in Saudi. And then them starting to tell me, well, Saudi this, Saudi that. Before they were curious, but I felt like now they were saying things about a place they had no idea about. And so I just, I sort of took that and I said, I got to go back to university, finish my degree, and then I got to figure out how I'm going to get out there and do something. And when I finished my degree, which was in communication, only thing I wanted to do is like, let me go to Hollywood and just figure it out and, just try to see that was the only thing I was interested in. How do I do it? And I remember I went out to Hollywood. I couldn't even afford being there for the first 2 weeks. I had to take a job selling hand lotion in Chicago with a Hollywood company for a few months. And then I came back and I signed up for Universal Casting, which is the big background thing. It was back then, it was like very physical. You take like a Polaroid shot, and then you get on the phone and you call in and you find out, you get on these big sets. And then I kind of, because I had the internet, and I remember I got a Mac and hacked all the programs. I don't repeat that, it's probably illegal, but at the time I did that. And I kind of taught myself to edit and do all these things. And I was getting on these sets and like talking to people and figuring it all out. And I kind of quickly realized, well, let me do this sort of film without, like, if I waited to find out how I could do, like, if I waited for someone to say direct this or produce this, I would be there forever doing it. It could take 20 years, 30 years. Someone can never choose you. You have to choose yourself. And that's when we kind of crowdsourced this Aramco Brat film. And that's what a lot of people don't understand is we just did it all self-funded. We basically did the trailer, and then we put the trailer online, and then did a PayPal link. There was no Kickstarter back then. It was a PayPal link, and people could pre-order the DVD. And through that, through the trailer, we kind of got discovered, and people were ordering it. And then, kind of lucky for us, this group, Friends of Saudi Arabia, wanted to see the movie, and we hadn't finished it. We premiered it over there. Sort of showed a bit of it in Orlando, and through that, eventually, we were contacted by Prince Turki Al Faisal, who was kind enough to, and really he wanted the DVD, but I kind of said, well, we'd love to give you the DVD once we release it, or we could do a private screening, and he was kind enough to invite us to Riyadh to do the private screening. So, and that Todd, was my reintroduction to Saudi.
Let me interrupt just 1 second, just for context for our listeners. So, the Aramco relationship with Saudi Arabia is unique and special, in my opinion. This is a large U.S. investment and company and community that came to work in Saudi Arabia. Many of them became very attached to Saudi Arabia and lived there for many years. And the end result was a large, cohesive, very close community that continues to meet, annually or in other things. So, and you being an Aramco brat, you are a made member of this cabal. So that's what we're talking about. When you said okay, we have this amazing community of Americans who have experience and a love for Saudi Arabia. I'm gonna tap into that.
And that's I'm glad you jumped in on that, because maybe I should take a step back and so the Aramco Brat experience is the expat experience. First of all, is an experience I think that people are having more and more as the world has gone larger and larger, more interconnected. And that goes across all cultures. I think there's a lot of people, I'm sure you guys have heard of the Third Culture Kid phenomenon, TCK book. And that I think growing up between cultures, the idea is there's a third culture you create. And that's a culture that's not either the one you come from or another one that you're in. And I would say that that experience, I mean, is becoming, I think, so universal, even with the internet. In a way, it's creating a third culture for people that are between their life on the internet, their life here, and they create a new one. And I mean, look at Obama. He was, for example, he was a third culture kid. He grew up overseas and lived a lot of places. And I do think that that experience gives you a different outlook on life. And it does make you in some ways into a storyteller automatic, because you're always having to translate between cultures and find out what the story is and where you can relate. Try to connect to other people, get past what would maybe be initial appearances to kind of go below the surface of other people and try to get the story out of them, as well as tell a story that makes you more human to them. And I think that practice is a very common one amongst third culture kids. It's why I think there's a automatic gelling there. The Aramco story is very unique. It's a culture within the expat story, which it's such a world in of itself. And there's really hundreds of thousands, like probably over 100,000 people at least, that have gone through this life like me,
Right.
and had this experience growing up. And I think for me, the drive of doing that story was multiple levels. One was actually just really to tell the story, I think, for people like me, to us to have something to reference and say, hey, here's a common experience. It's something that, you know, that all these other people, it's sort of their story and our story. And that was the very basic, I think, drive. But then there was another level to, like, because that's our story, and because sort of the American experience and also the Saudi experience is involved in that, I think the natural then thing was there was a bit of, a bit of protectiveness over, when people start talking about the place you grew up in.
Right.
And I think that's what gave it that other level as well, of people hearing all these things about this country, Saudi Arabia, but never no one really being there. So to hear from people that have lived there, I think was very profound. I mean, when we did a screening in Hollywood, I remember I had one of those, this Kim Tadeo, she was one of the executive producers for Robert De Niro's films. She was bawling her eyes out when she saw it. She said, I had no idea there were Americans over there, or any, like, the experience of, and that was back in like 2007. But
Well,
yeah.
I want to two things. One, I'm going to do a plug for the 966 because we just had just an unbelievably good episode with Prince Turki Al Faisal.
Great guy.
And I'll wrap in two things. One, and what's interesting is that we talked about one of the things that when Prince Turki came on, I said, let's focus on your father, King Faisal.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about the King Faisal Foundation. And part of one of the aspects of the King Faisal Foundation was the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, which is what picked up your film. All right, so that's so that's our that's a shameless plug for the 966. Again, it's an amazing episode with Prince Turki. Please go listen to it. But I also want to put two other things. One is you talk about the Aramco experience and the affinity the Americans feel. It's really the Aramcons are in many ways beloved by Saudis too. So it's a mutual admiration and respect. Saudis, have always taken Aramcons to their heart and appreciated their being involved in their country. One more pin. This is 2007 when you did Home, the Aramco Brat story. Let's return to the beginning where Todd Albert Nims is the mythic figure that, haunts all the arts, backstories of Saudi Arabia. Cinemas were not opened again in Saudi Arabia until April 2018. So not, all the things that we've been talking about on the 966 of late and all the, things you get about changes in Saudi Arabia. This is April 2018. So back to your story, you're at 2007 in your Aramco Brad story.
So to add on to that, and to kind of reiterate some of what you just said, Prince Turki Al Faisal, I wouldn't have ever been back in Saudi if it wasn't for Prince Turki Al Faisal. He is a legend. He was the ambassador to the United States. He was also the former head of intelligence here, but he's also just done a lot, I think, to I mean, support people like, I mean, find people like me. I wouldn't say support, but as far as like bring it. So, like I said, he wanted the DVD and but he was gracious enough to invite us out to screen it in LA. I'm sorry, in Riyadh. And what happened is we did sort of a screening with, I remember, princes and some diplomats. And it was maybe about 60, 70 people at the King Faisal Center for Research Islamic Studies, which has a large cinema-like, auditorium, which with big screen. And actually, I approached him after we did it, and it was great. I thanked him, and we were very, very gracious. I said, very gracious. I said, I said, Prince Turkey, Your Royal Highness, like, this is wonderful. And I also know, like, but what a shame, because there's been no public screening of movies since, probably before Ju'ayman in the 79, because everything got it shut down. So I said, wouldn't it be great if we could screen this film to the public? And he said, you know what? Absolutely. I love the idea. Let's do it. And he was very gracious, kept me, basically let me stick around. And we kind of sent the other guys. And I was there till a few months later, in February of 2008. We did that. We did the first public screening. And this is where I started. That's why I think some people call me the first guy. I started the first, so it's like, the first public screening that had been done in, I guess, 30 years or something like that, right? Yeah. And we had this. I think it fits somewhere between 500 to 700 people. And it was standing. We usually had people standing there, and then it was just packed with people. And I still, to this day, I run into people, and they're like, "Oh, I know I saw way back in 2007 that movie, And so it was and then it was just such a joyous occasion, and that was quite a moment, I think, for cinema, for me, and for cinema, I think, for Saudi. And it was also an indicator, I think, of a lot of the changes that were starting to already happen that people didn't know, but that were going on, kind of below the surface, that you could see already going on in that direction, which Prince Turki was also a part of. In fact, if anything, Prince Turki Al Faisal also, I mean, he has an epic role in the cinema too. He was doing at that time the Arabia 3D, which I was very fortunate to sort of. I was sort of able to be involved a little, not really in it, but around. He let me come to some meetings with him and stuff, and that was an epic. That was the first IMAX of Saudi Arabia 3D, and they also did this other one on Mecca, and so that was like he was starting to do these things already, and. Yeah, I mean, funny enough, later on, of course, which we're not to that part of the story, it ended up coming full circle, and I was able to come around and help and kind of be a part of the help kind of make this whole movie happen with the Born a King movie, which was 10 years down the road after that whole thing.
Right.
But yes, in the meantime, we did the comedy, and the online shows and all that kind of stuff, which was also part of that. Eventually became part of those things.
So talk a little bit about the comedy, because I guess you were sort of part of this C3 initiative. Is that correct? Which evolved into Telfaz 11.
Yep.
And again, just for our viewers, I mean, Telfaz 11 is a big deal. They just 2 years ago they signed an 8 deal with Netflix.
They're huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, there we are in the comedy story, and you go back to the origins. There's Todd Albert Nims. So tell us a little bit about that.
So one of the founders of Telfaz, Ali Kelthami, who's coming out with a big feature film here coming up soon, but he's become a very talented director. So back, funny enough, when I did Home America Red Story, he was an IT guy at Al Arabiya. At NBC, and he was the translator for this interview I was doing with Al Arabiya about the movie. And from the moment that we met, even before the interview, we were cracking jokes, and we ended up hanging out like every day for a year after that. We just hung out. And during that time, one of the other interviews I had with Saudi television, there was a guy who approached me after the interview. It's also about the film. They were asking expats about their kind of impressions about Home Miracle Brad's story. And this British guy comes up to me. He says, "Listen, I'm doing this comedy stuff. I've just started. I really want to have someone help me with it and film." And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And then so started filming these comedy shows. Actually, would bring Ali with me. He was doing his first film work, like doing the switch and stuff. And then we were all these young Saudi comedians that were opening for these international headliners, and we were all becoming friends and doing these shows together. And then I said we were going around with Ali, and I remember we would talk all the time. And I said, we got to do something, And then it was funny. I kind of went with Rotana TV, another big television channel here, and they wanted me to. I was talking about I want to do this music documentary. There's so much there was so much music here in Saudi, underground bands. And the guy ended up, like, the head of the channel at the time. He was sort of like, can you do it? Can you make all these other scenes and make it this docudrama almost? Finally, I just said, you know what? I love what you're saying. I'm going to come back to you with the script. And basically, that's when we did this first, like, sketch comedy script that wasn't a documentary at all. It was just a total fictional thing about four losers that, like, always try things and they fail. It was called Almost Takriban. And that was the first time all these young comedians ever acted in anything, like Ibrahim Khrela, who's ended up now one of the owners of Telfaz, Fahad Bateri, who was huge at the time. A lot of the guys it was their first thing, and we all filmed it. And it was like, I remember we sold my iPhone to get, like, use the camera and stuff like that the first time. So it was a real, like, and I remember we bought it to NBC, and it was way too advanced for their time. They were just like, Saudis, they don't think anything's funny. This is comedy for no. Saudis don't like comedy. Like, oh, you can't do this. Like, it's the youth. What do you mean? It was like they didn't get it. And if you're listening, NBC, too bad you missed out. But anyway. But to fast forward through all, or to kind of, so then after that, that was the reason, because they didn't accept that. It was like, let's forget NBC. They don't get it. Let's do things online. And so I got stuck back in the U.S. For a little bit, and Ali and Ala, who was kind of working at STC at the time, they shot this little, like, spoof commercial with this guy Khalifa, who was in the sketch thing. He was like this guy who did this funny rap thing, another comedian guy. It went well. A lot of people reacted to it online. So when I got back, they were filming Ithra, and anyway, at the time we had formed, right before I left, we had formed what we called C3, which stood for, this is something we'd always talk about, it was called Creative Culture Catalyst, C3. We wanted to catalyze a creative culture here in Saudi. Catalyze creative culture, C3, Creative Culture Catalyst. And that was the idea behind, what we were kind of doing, is like, it was actually the similar idea of why I wanted to, like, the reason I was ever interested in comedy is because it was another way for not just other foreigners, but also Saudis to see a new lens, a human lens, themselves through a human lens, and others to see it through a human lens. Because a lot of times we put people under a microscope through a certain lens, especially Saudis. There's a bias thing that it's like, I don't know, either oil, human rights, religion, or, kind of this, like, royal family kind of sheikh thing, or Bedouin type thing. But it's never like just as human beings. And there is this thing, when you laugh with someone, that's when you really feel you get to know them. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the idea behind it. And it was like, how can, sort of like, that was what drew me. It was like having, and not just foreigners, like a lot of Saudi at the time. When I came in 2007 to Riyadh, and I hadn't really spent any time in Riyadh, everyone I met hated being in Saudi. They did not like it. They didn't like their own country. They didn't like being here. And part of it was because they had totally bought into an external narrative that was really, everything was just bad news about Saudi at that point. They had been like that since 9/11. 6 years of just bad reading external press that was just down on the country. And also there was a lot of other things too, just like it was a different place at that time. But funny enough, you fast forward to now, all those same people love it here. And and because so much has changed and they've got opportunity. So it's just so interesting. But I think part of it was, I kept saying, like, what idea was, become the media before it becomes you. We need to tell the story. Let's do comedy ourselves. Let's do our own sketch. And that was what the online sketch was for. So we came back when we did the second episode of Ithra at my house in Dhahran. But at that point, the reason I got back was because, well, it's another story, but I kind of came back. I was trying to figure out how I was going to get back to Saudi, and I could not. But I ended up getting hired by Ithra because my mother told me maybe 6 months before, she's sick of me doing all this stuff, not making money, kind of like just losing, using it as a passion. Said, you need to get a job, doing PR, so do something, And then she said, I applied for this position, this film producer position. And I said, no, they'll find me if they know what they're doing. 6 months later, sure enough, they reached out to me. apply for this position. So anyway, I did, and that was where I had to make a tough decision, which was stay with the C3 thing, which was, of course, it really wasn't. It was just something we were doing out of passion, or take the job at Ithra. And we all talked about it. And at the end of the day, I everyone felt this way. And be honest, they were doing their own stuff at that point. They didn't really even need me. They were already, everything was in Arabic. Not even they needed me, but I don't think I was contributing the way I could before, because everything was turned into Arabic. They were shooting the stuff on their own. They were killing it. And it was just like, here's this guy who doesn't really, this is a sad thing. I don't actually speak Arabic properly, believe it or not. I truly am an Aramco brat as English. And it's just sad. But yeah, I ended up taking this job at Ithra, the film producer position. And we thought one day I could help.
I want to do that Ithra thing, but on the comedy, when we talk with people on the 966 about this, I'm not sure what the term is, but this, this sort of explosion of artistic activity in Saudi Arabia. And Lucian, I think you agree with me. The constant refrain is it was always there. It was always there. It just couldn't. There was no platform for it. The society in general wasn't ready for it. And you can see why that would frustrate the younger generation. But on the other thing, I've often thought, because I first went to the Saudi Arabia, lived in Saudi Arabia in the mid-'80s, have an affinity for it. And I've often thought about my friendships with Saudis. And one of the things that I've always found that there's almost immediate connection as an American is almost every Saudi I know is inclined to laugh.
Yeah.
They want to, they love humor. They love good humor. They love to share humor. And I'm that way. And I think a lot of Americans are. And for me, that was always a connection. The first response was sort of a happy laughter response. And I don't know if that's been your experience, but it certainly has.
So what you're saying, I really resonate with. In fact, I'd love to comment on that, which is, Saudis have always had a sense of humor for sure. And I also think even especially the 80s onward, that became I think became a very unique sense of humor. And part of it because good comedy, and maybe this is getting a little deep, but it's true, is that it's, comedy actually is a way of rejection. It's a way of, like, a lot of comedy. It's actually it's like a way of rejecting something, but kind of accepting it, like these absurd situations of life, which and it's what it does is it gives you a perspective on something you didn't have, and it makes you see it in an absurd way in good comedy, and that's what makes you crack up, right? Because you just see it and you go, oh my God, this is so absurd. You realize how absurd it is. And I think that for a long time, a lot of Saudis and some of how they deal with some of the challenges they faced is through that kind of. That's why the comedy is so used a lot here to kind of it's a way of, in a way, like coping, and there's just a funny, like, it's such a sophisticated, developed such a sophisticated sense of humor. It's very unique. I mean, especially the Nejdi Riyadh one is very unique, the way they do the comedy. It's hilarious. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, I guess, that I think that when you say it was underneath the surface, that comedic sense has been developed over a while. I think with Saudis, they do love to laugh. I think Saudis have a lot in common with Americans, surprisingly enough, because they've both been, like, very Saudi from the get-go has always been a self-determined country. Unlike a lot of other parts of the Middle East, it was never beholden to a colonial power for its formation. Right. And therefore, a lot like Japan, a first world country, it's come to the first world on its own terms. Like in Japan, it's first world, but it's different. Japan is how it is. You either take it or leave it. Same how Saudi, it's always kind of been itself. You either take it or you leave it. When a lot of other countries, like nation states, the whole idea of our current world, the way it's set up with nation states, is kind of the idea of a nation state begins with being formed out of people, either someone coming to power and everyone seeing that on their own terms, or through some other process but it's determined by the people. If you don't do that from the beginning, it's kind of a crippled system because you don't have the whoever's in power looking out. First of all, everyone knows they're not legitimate, and then they're not looking out the interests of their own interests. They're having to be beholden to something other outside of themselves. And I think that's important to realize for Saudi, because that I think it shares that, and that kind of the cowboy culture is very similar to the Bedouin culture. And so there's this very Saudis intend to be fairly genuine, and they just like that open-heartedness, laugh. And therefore the sense of humor is somewhat similar too, because the Saudi and American relationship's been long and deep. Mm-hmm. And therefore there's that aspect as well, where unlike a lot of other parts of the Middle East and the world even, Saudi's one of the few places there's a weird parallelism to American life, because you go here, the roads are like American. You go, a lot of the business culture is more American actually than it is British, or you go a lot of parts of the world, it's like a British or French or Portuguese or Spanish. There's these, because of colonialism, and that those echoes are still there on how the things were formed. When here in Saudi, there's this imprint that's not colonial, it's actually from business, but being done at a very early day with America, and this relationship that was more of a on equal footing from the early day, and it's a very business thing.
I think I agree with that, and that equal footing perception. For Saudis, not only obviously birthplace of Islam, but never been colonized. Its origin stories, they've been Saud. We essentially, right. and it's similar to the U.S. and we created ourselves. Saudis don't look at it that way because it's not, that's too arrogant. But that we did, we brought this country together. They've been Saud, and we've held it together. We are the birthplace of Islam. You're exactly right. When they engage with the world and with Americans, it's very much on an equal footing. It's, so it is a different tone and tenor. But let's talk about Ithra, because again, you went there, and you established the first cinema. We talk a lot about the Red Sea Film Festival and stuff, but you launched the Saudi Film Days back, again, a decade ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
So I joined Ithra in 2010, October. It was really still just, they had laid a symbolic foundational stone, but it wasn't, it was a long way till it was going to be built. It was still a ways off. I think it was 2016 or 17 when they finally opened. So there was a good 5 years or so that we were not.
What you're referring to, and this is the beauty of our YouTube channel, because Lucian, who does this, but it can put together that architectural masterpiece of what that facility looks like.
Beautiful. A lot of meaning in it too. I love it's such a beautiful, internationally renowned architecture companies competed to build it, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And even there's meaning in the whole entire thing, the past, future, present, and up and down. You go, I love the whole kind. The place is gorgeous. It's one of a kind. It truly is. I've been a lot of places in the world, and it is very unique. It's a very unique and beautiful piece of work. So the building itself is a work of art, as is the things inside. So it was a real privilege. I was it was a first of its time. This is before 2030 vision, all this stuff. So it was a real honor to sort of be given the chance to be there. And when I was hired, they said, you're going to work to make a feature film, which is something we eventually did get to do, which was Jude, which is an amazing. I'm very proud of that. But before all that, there were many years of doing projects here and there that were kind of cool artistic projects we got to do that weren't movies but other things. And I won't go into all the details, but we definitely had a lot of programs we were running through Ithra, like the IRE program and all these kind of programs that were sort of youth-based programs, and all that involved art and other things that were kind of the first of almost what really now are in a way the seasons and all these programs that are going on now. But this was sort of early days of doing these things the first time. And so it was a real place. We got to do training actors in theater. We brought down the National Youth Theater. So a lot of the actors now, they're really good. A lot of those went through that National Youth Theater program. And it was just, training with really, they were West End heavyweights. And it was fantastic. There were so many firsts we got to do there. one of those first, other than making the film, was definitely towards the end of my time there, to be honest. It was like the last, because I left in 2017. But the last couple of years, 16, 17, I was fortunate to help, I would say, because, I wasn't the only one for sure that did the Saudi Film Days. But I was able to go to Hollywood when we first started and kind of introduce the program, kind of get everyone worked into the Hollywood scene to kind of launch that initiative. Faisal Baltayor was really a big part of doing that. I got to kind of show him around and do some of his first trip to Hollywood, and that was what led to becoming the Film Days program, which was pretty amazing. It was really a program of giving a lot of grants out to young filmmakers and having them make movies, and then getting to premiere those in Hollywood to industry people. And it went on for 2 years. And I really was just involved at the beginning, and then I was so into finishing the film. But it was something I got to touch and be a part of and help out. And it definitely eventually, I think, even before that, I would say even before that program, another thing we got to do was really work on the Saudi Film Festival, which was Ben Amula had started way back in 2000. I think the first one was 2008 or 2009. And that was something I got to attend, by the way, back in like when it first started with Ahmed Amulad. And then we luckily came around full circle. It was something that stopped for a while. And then we got to, when I got to be in that position, I got to work with, we got to sort of get Ahmed Amula, Abdullah Ayaf was also there at the time. We got to get Ahmed Amula back on board and be supportive of the Saudi Film Festival. Started having Ithra host the Saudi Film Festival, which we did outside of Ithra first because it wasn't built yet. And then eventually it became a part of actual Ithra and be hosted at Ithra, which has become, it's the longest running film festival in Saudi. It's going to be in its 9th year this coming year. Even though everyone talks a lot of the Red Sea, I think the Saudi Film Festival is the very local, it's got a lot more, well, it's been around a lot longer, so it's very developed in that respect. And it's at Ithra, which is a beautiful location. And that's given rise to a ton of filmmakers who are now doing things at a lot of those people participated in the Saudi Film Days, and then also are now in the Red Sea and everything else. So it was also a big part of growing the scene. I would almost say that was even before Saudi Film Days, and then Saudi Film Days. And then, of course, left really after we did Jude. Jude is an amazing film. That was something we shot over like an entire year. And that was, I wish it still is working on major distribution, but it is a feature-length film that is kind of these slices of life films, no words, kind of like a Samsara or Baraka or Keanu Squatzy.
IMAX quality,
and just
right?
It's IMAX quality. We did the soundtrack, all original, London Contemporary Orchestra and a Saudi band, which was just incredible. A mix, and it was very, and the whole thing. Some call it a love letter to Saudi, which I kind of think it is. But it's deep. It's the cycle of life in reverse, and it's kind of asking you to look below the surface of everyday experience and kind of see how life is giving, even when it feels like it's taking away. That's why it's called Jude. Jude is the word for giving when you have nothing else to give. When you have nothing, basically.
It can't. Is it available to be seen? Is it?
It is at Ithra, and then they keep promising me, because I keep bugging them, is we've got to get it out. Like it never really was released, and there's a few reasons for that. It was going to be at the,
I mean, I've seen excerpts and snippets, and it looks so lush and so, just top scale.
I'm very proud
in
of
terms
that film.
Production. Yeah.
It really is.
It'd be great if it got out there, but I want to. Then when you referred a couple of times working on the film, and I think you're talking about Born a King.
So after I left, basically, yes. I was towards the end of my tenure there, and I left and did that. Yeah.
And I'm really interested in origins of that. I mean, what a fascinating human being Faisal bin Abdulaziz was, King Faisal. And but I have a question before that. And it's something that's been a mystery to me for years and years. What does a producer do?
I think the truth is so what a lot of people don't realize is that they don't get as much glory a lot of times, but behind every film is the person who actually finds the people, and usually I think good producers are always creative producers as well. Like but they kind of take both. It's really the person that makes the film happen. I mean, that
Right.
finds, that really finds, for example, they might even, it could start with a concept, and maybe they find a writer to write it. Some there you have writer producers, like I do a lot of
Well,
writing.
talk
But
about how you went about doing
Yeah.
Born a King as a producer.
So in this case, I was a co-producer. So I was basically at Ithra, and the producer of the film, a Spanish producer, he kind of came to me and said, "Look, I've been kind of developing this concept. I've already pitched it to Prince Turki Al Faisal, and I've got like an initial draft of like kind of the sort of the treatment, initial part of the script." He told me about it, and then kind of when he learned, actually, I think that I had been involved, and I read I knew a lot about the whole, already had been reading a lot, and it was an interest of mine, obviously, and when I heard the story, and he had said, about Faisal when he's 13, and so he wants to do, and he still needed to kind of get, kind of, there's kind of the development phase, right? We're finishing developing. You're trying to finalize the script. You're trying to get all these things done to then kind of get the film ready to be made. Because making a film is a little bit like this. The first step is almost like getting the script is a little bit like, it's a little, if you were to, the equivalent is if you think about real estate, it's like the script is the piece of land upon which you build the house. So you kind of have to have that piece of land. That's the developing, in a way, find that piece of land. And the concept in general is like, what kind of piece of land do we want? But then you like have to get that actual piece of land, which is the script. So that was where I kind of came at an early stage, helped, kind of fund finishing that, and then was just involved in, once we kind of then took that step towards actually, okay, this is going to be made, which of course King Faisal Center for Islamic Studies was a key component to that, as well as a few others. And that was when I got to really be involved in the Saudi portion of the whole thing, which was, doing all the casting, getting the crew, and for something that we had to go from, because I'd done go from scratch. I already knew a lot of what we were up against, but had to kind of, it's hard enough to kind of cast, but then when you have to find people that look like, the
Right.
people that, that gives another level. That's a real challenge in historical dramas, right? You have to really find someone that, Abdulaziz was a 6'4", character.
Right.
It had a very, he was huge,
Right.
and then Faisal has also to kind of had a look, and he was very well known. You could see videos of all that at the time. He was this 13-year-old trip. He was on TV a lot. There's a lot of
But you're right.
So,
He had a very specific look.
The specific look. So it was not a normal, it was a very unique look. So finding someone that could kind of get that tone, and then, obviously it's not like we're in the West End or in LA or New York, where you have people that have done years of training and acting,
Right.
and the thing is, we wanted to find Saudi, right? People that had been here in Saudi and lived it and could have that essence. So, and I think we succeeded. That was a big, that was the big challenge, to kind of get all that set up. And then the crew too, like we want to try to really have Saudis as much as possible. So that was like, especially in the early stages of getting everything ready, and the locations as well, finding the locations. I remember, when we started and stumbled upon this Al Adria, which is where we did a lot of the filming, which is like outside of Riyadh, which is this remake of Musmak Fort. And that was also where this company, Nabras, was, which had never done anything. They just had a bunch of equipment out there. They really wanted to make a feature film. They bought all this stuff, and I remember they were saying, hey, yeah, they literally had that land with the Musmak Fort. They said, hey, can you come see our studio? Which we kind of get a lot of when you're looking around. Hey, come see our thing. And we said, okay, yeah, sure, let's come see it. I remember they showed me this place, which was just like this hangar full of equipment. It was like all this studio equipment. They said, hey, yeah. And I said, what have you guys done before? They said, well, Nothing, but we work on the film with you. I sort of said, I need to get back to you. Let me check with everybody. And inside I'm going, yes, yeah. So that was kind of they got a big break. It was a win-win. It was like their first thing. And it was just, it's funny how things work out sometimes in life. And it just came together. I mean, that's kind of, I feel like, been a lot of my life, just kind of following that next, what seems to be falling into place. And yeah, that was kind of how it all came together. I mean, it was a pleasure. It was a real thrill to work on. It was a very unique production because it was kind of a Spanish team and an English team. And then the sort of, I got to be the kind of the Saudi portion of it. And then of course, Prince Turki, I got to work with Prince Turki Al Faisal, which was just it was an honor. It felt like, and that was a real privilege because I was trying to kind of give back for him inviting me way back when. So it was kind of like, for me, like a full circle thing. I still feel I could do much more, and I'm happy to do much more anytime. But it's nice to be able to kind of help tell a story that you are already connected to in a way through kind of Prince Turki Al Faisal. And I think I'm really happy with the film. I just wish we had gotten it. I wish it had a chance to get further than it did, more distribution outside. And I hope one day it does get that. But I think that was just unfortunately because of sort of the timing of the release. It just didn't work out the way we'd hoped.
Yeah, but it's not. Lucian, you saw it on Shahid? You saw it on NBC?
I got it on my computer, on my laptop. So you may not have gotten the appropriate royalties from that. I'm sorry about that. But if I could ask you, Todd, what's next? What are you working on now? We know you're in Saudi right now on a pretty cool road trip, but what's next for you?
So there's a few things. One, I have to bring it up because we kind of touched on him before because we're kind of going a little back in history. We touched upon Abdulaziz, who is a very epic figure. I mean, to me, the story of Abdulaziz is truly epic. And I've been working on a script now for 12 years about the Abdulaziz Ibn Saud story. It's like a Braveheart story. It's so amazing because it sort of starts out when he's 9, he's being chased out of Riyadh. He ends up in the desert, this is all true. And he, like, basically between 9 and 16, he grows to be, 6'4", and he learns to live off dates and learns to battle. It's like the classic. It becomes this epic guy, comes to Kuwait, and then eventually that's when he, like, at 16, he comes in to take over Riyadh, and then there's more of it following that.
That's a story. This story is so good. I mean, this was a swashbuckling guy. I mean, he's out raiding in the winter of 1902, and his dad says, "Come home," and he says, "No, I'm going to take 40 of my best buds and go across and take Riyadh. I'm going to climb palm trees and retake our birthright, and the Al Saud family." It's just an unbelievable story. And you're right. It's compelling in any medium, any language.
What fascinates me too is because I always think of the psychology. The thing about how, like, imagine at 9, you're growing up in Riyadh. You kind of have your life. You're so young. You don't really know. But then you get kind of chased out. And then you're living in the Ruba Khali with the Murra. The Murra are the most badass trackers historically. Like, these guys can follow anything. And you're learning from these guys the ways of, like, the track. I mean, you're becoming this, like, they're kind of like, in a lot of ways, very epic when it comes to all this stuff and survival and all these kind of things and tracking and all these, and you learn to do the raids, and you're really learning firsthand, not as like a hoity-toity royal, not to say that's anyone who's hoity-toity, but to survive. So you're learning this in a real way. And then I would just be thinking, my psychology, I'm being told, you come from this great family, and but yet you look around and you're barely surviving, and you're having to do that for years. And then you're just thinking, I'm the guy that I'm supposed to, I need to bring back this kingdom, but make it in the most permanent way possible. I think that, honestly, you come out of there with that psychology. I think that's how he was able to do what he did, and not just stop at Riyadh, and really unite. And then just the whole strategy and the things he did was so smart. Like, I kind of know it really intimately because we're doing this. So my dream one day, and I say one day because I've been working on this without, like, I would love for one day, hopefully, someone up top blesses the script and I'm able to actually do it. because it's not there yet. But I've been we did a bunch of rewrites recently, and I want to run it through Dara. There's a new head of that, and I'm hoping that somehow, someone, because I would love to make that. That would be my dream film. So that's sort of the thing I'm working on. I had to bring it up because it's just such a cool story, and I think it's going to be epic if ever it gets to be told. It is a cool
story. I really hope you can do this.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, I love the start of it too. The way we started is like FDR and him meeting, because that's a really fascinating meeting when they first start out, because I have the pamphlet from this Colonel Eddie who, he was a translator. Right. Colonel Eddie actually started the Office of Special Affairs, which later became the CIA. It's such his tale of telling of the FDR meeting with Abdulaziz is so cool. It is the coolest thing to read. It's this great.
That's the back end of this figure. He's a swashbuckling young guy. His favorite aunt whispering in his ears, "You have a destiny. You're going to go back." And then he basically creates the country, unifies much of the peninsula. But he's also quite a politically savvy leader.
Yeah.
On top of all this, that FDR connection. But yeah, it's a great story. I hope you can do this, Todd.
It's great, and that also gives an American lead too. It'd be great. I hope so. I think we've done it in a way I think that would work. But anyway, so that's one. Another thing is, so after we finished Born a King, I started doing, as you kind of alluded to, some theater. I did the first big immersive theater, and I would really like I don't know if you guys are familiar. Most people aren't with immersive theater, but like the most classic example most people know about is Sleep No More in New York. It's kind of this where it's not stage theater. You go into a building as a guest. You play a role as a visitor, and you're kind of immersed in this world. And for me, I wanted to get into this kind of storytelling specifically because I think the future is in augmented reality. I think these phones we're talking on as smartphones. Apple's going to come out with glasses soon. They're going to basically STC or AT&T are going to be saying, "Do you want to do a phone, or you want a pair of these augmented reality glasses where you can see the world, but you have like digital overlays?" And to me, that's going to create a new form of experience. It's going to go beyond cinema because you're going to be playing roles in what you do, and this firsthand and sort of nonlinear storytelling. So I've been trying to do that. Well, I liked first, so I wanted to do a first immersive. I wanted to do that in Saudi because I just have to. But with the 5G coming, that's where I'm kind of gearing towards. But before I do that, because that's a little way off, because we won this hackathon recently with Ericsson to kind of do some kind of underlying VR, virtual Earth grid, I would call it, this technology. But past that, I'm also working on a musical right now, a Saudi musical. It's a contemporary musical because I want to do the first musical.
But of course you are.
Yeah. Right. I know, of course. And that would be my goal, is to do that. I've also got a kind of a sci-fi film I'm developing, and I'm making also a film out of the immersive experience we did in Jeddah, because the writing for this immersive experience we already did. I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's just because it's very fascinating. We basically took this lore from the area, from Al Balad. Al Balad is the old original part of Jeddah. It's probably one of the most fascinating parts of the country, because you go there, there's these beautiful homes, and they've got this Mishrabiyah doors, and it's just so unique. That's where all the old families of Jeddah were for hundreds of years, and there's these stories from that area. And so we kind of took that and we created this kind of story, Beit al-Dahlizi. It's about this family. It means kind of the family of the corridors, but of course the way we tell it is, and a lot of people think this family is a real family. It's not. We made it up. But sort of their job at the time, their history was to dig tunnels from the time of the Ottomans. Like, the Ottomans were known for digging tunnels. So they would dig all the tunnels under Al-Balad. A lot of people say they made their money from that. Other people say they made their money from the jinn, which are like kind of the ghosts, because the jinn live in tunnels. So that's sort of the backstory to the kind of this family. But basically the whole thing's about, it's like a supernatural murder mystery where this guy Salah has been killed. Some of the families blaming it on the jinn. And of course the jinn are upset because they don't want to be blamed for the whole thing. So you're kind of, there's this whole backstory there where you show up as a suspect in the murder. A judge is calling you to trial, ends up being a jinn judge. So we're kind of making a film out of this, which is cool because it's going to go to the spirit world of this Salah, because he kind of dies in the beginning. It's the first person narrative of him, but he's dead in the start. So he's a dead person telling this story. And we're going to kind of start out in the spirit world and do all this stuff. So I think it's going to be a great film. But we are kind of waiting for the film box office to grow a little bit for a lot of this stuff. So that's why I'm kind of focusing a little more on theater and still developing these things on the side, because the box office is growing and it's going to continue to grow. And that's only going to be better for getting kind of real returns in the, you're going to tell a Saudi story, you want to make sure it does good locally first. And so, yeah, I would say there's a few levels we're working on, but that's one of them.
So let's bring it on home. So you're chairman of the Arts, Culture, and Entertainment Committee for the AmCham KSA. We just had, again, let's do a shout out. We just had Bill Foster, who's chairman of the AmCham KSA, join us. Great conversation, and we're big fans of the U.S. business community in Saudi Arabia. We think it's our greatest asset here at the 966 anyway. And so give us a quick overview if you can. To sort of like what's changed. And what's the current environment for the arts in Saudi Arabia? And what, as you're head of that committee, what's your focus?
So I've been doing this committee as asked to do it in 2019. So I've been doing it for the last 3 years now, and it's been really, really wonderful because and I've been plugged into all levels of the art scene already anyway, so it's kind of a continuation of sort of what I was already doing. It was a natural fit for me, and it is I would say the art scene, of course, if you want to look at the changes, there's obvious changes that have already gone on in the country, which is the opening up of the country. I think the killing of a lot of the corruption, and then just the opening up and the support of the arts and culture it is such a rare thing. And there's a few times in the world where sort of, I would say, you're in the right place at the right time. And I also believe sometimes a place has its time, like Riyadh right now it's its time. Like it is having its time, even Saudi, especially Riyadh, it's its time. Like Dubai might've been at its time maybe a few years back, but I think it's Riyadh's time. And I think that it's a unique place when you have support and like earmarked support from the top for all these different lines of arts and culture. It's rare in any country. And when it is done, it's not done at that level and with that amount of power behind it, being able to be so direct and not have to go along a lot of avenues to kind of deliver that support. And so there's that. There's also, we right now in Saudi are in a very unique sense of like what I always parallel to is the baby boomer generation in the U.S., which was after World War II, right? We had this huge population burst amongst the whole allies, all the West, not just in America, but in Europe as well, where you had this huge burgeoning young population. And that is actually the term pop culture is actually coined from that generation, popular culture of this population. Everything was catering to them. It changed every time they grew. Like when they were young, more schools were built. As they grew older, businesses like catered to them, like the children's program was made because they wanted to cater to this kid. It was every business opportunity started looking at how can we cater to this generation because it was the most sales. And that just shifted everything. Even the way we view pop culture now, a lot of us don't realize we look at the world a lot of times. If you're a hit, if you like cinema, you like music, a lot of it, even advertising, a lot of it's through their eyes. Even the way we call generations, like why is, I don't know, why do we think of the 50s as like Leave It to Beaver and the 60s is like Peace, Love, Dope and kind of like, this kind of like, and 70s is like Coke and Disco and Jobs and all this kind of stuff. And 80s is family time. Why is 80s family time? Well, these guys, we were kids and they're Leave It to Beaver. They were kind of high school protesting wars at that 60s, 70s. They're getting their first job. They're experimenting with drugs. Okay. 80s, they're like having families, they're kids. That's why it's family time. 90s is like really rebellious because all their kids are teenagers. From there, it's like, who are these grandkids? Generation this, Generation X, Y, Z. Like, so we still name everyone through. We're still looking, but that's also they're starting to die out. Like we're actually like that's where we have this. Like we don't have a solid narrative anymore in the world. But what we do see is in Saudi, this new, I would call the baby boomer generation. You see this a lot also in other parts of like Africa and the Middle East, or in Asia. But this young population, 70% is under the age of 30. And that is this new, what I would say, the new baby boomers that's happening in Saudi, what happened over there. And also the fact that we have a young kind of like in a way Kennedy was, but we have like a young, this young leader, right? Who's really, this is a person, one of the few people I would say in the world right now that is of a position of power in politics that actually viscerally understands and emotionally connects to things like the internet and social media, and like grew up, had some actual experience with that. I mean, a lot of people intellectually get that, but aren't living and haven't lived it. And I think that is very, very unique, because I think right now we're in a time where we still have a lot of leaders who are from a different generation, and the world has changed so much for younger people, and the lived experience is so much different because there's this other thing we call the internet life and the social media life and all these things that it's changing how we are as a culture in the world and interaction. And that to me, and now we're going to have soon enough this augmented reality, which is going to be another shift with smartphones. And I think Saudi's very positioned with culture arts. I think the investment is so smart in going all these directions, and also looking at the new ones with 5G there. And I see there is a big opportunity for, especially storytelling and sharing culture from Saudi, and mixing technology with these kind of new experiences and new forms. And I love how there's a lot of experimentation going on here. And to me, that's where I see the most potential. And I see a lot of, you have all these, like, this whole entrepreneur ecosystem. It's like there's Launchpad from this, there's MISC in general, which is a great organization that I think is, and then there's, startup and investment in startups, all these kind of things for all these fresh ideas. I think that combined with the investment in just arts, culture, and music and film and theater, that if we keep working that direction here, I think there's so much potential, because you have resources meeting youth and innovation. And if they can keep that pathway open to keep getting those investments into these fresh, younger generation, I think we're going to see a lot of things that won't just be good for Saudi coming from arts and culture, but there'll be things that will go beyond Saudi that can be actually, we need 2030 visions, not just in Arabia. We need it. I wish in the West, as an American, I wish we had more people that were looking beyond the next 4 years. I wish we had 2050 visions, 2060. I would love to see more long-term thinking coming out of not just every government everywhere, because that's what we need going forward is thinking beyond a very small pan. We need to keep looking at where are we going to be in 100 years from now, and let's work towards that. And I love that we're doing that here. I'm sure we'll come out with a 2050 vision at some point, or there will be that. But I love that that's where people are at. And right. I think culture and arts is a lot of the artist's job in society is to paint the picture for tomorrow that we all walk into. And I think that that's what I feel obligated to do personally, but I also hope I facilitate from the American Chamber. And I think our job is to try to take the best of what America has to offer and the business have to offer America, to mix that with what Saudi's trying to do and continue that relationship in the Middle East and in Saudi in particular. And I see, and maybe you mentioned, and I said this before, I don't know how you got that about the next generation thing, but this is how I see it, is like the first wave of, it used to be oil, I think, that came over Saudi. And that was maybe, let's call it the first gold rush and opportunity to change. And then I think there was sort of the industrialization wave that came over, and that was maybe the second. I think this part with arts and culture is the third. And it's not just, I wouldn't even call it, it's a goal. When I say goal, it's an opportunity, and it's a chance to change things. And not just for Saudi, it's also for internationally. I think there's a lot of people that want to do things in new ways. They want a place that will support that. And I think that's why Saudi is an exciting place. Everyone that comes here, international artists, are always like, wow, I'm getting to do things I don't think I would ever do other places. And that's what I keep telling people, and hoping to keep doing that and spread and make those connections to make that a place that we bring the right people to that. Because what I'm not about is the goal is the people that are coming in and here and out just for the money. So right. I'm hoping that we can have more people that make it and grow in a sustainable way that I think is going to make a beacon, not just for here, but hopefully a leader beyond just the Saudi realm. If it's done right, I think it can.
Todd Albert Nims, creative producer, writer, director, American expat born in Saudi Arabia, key player in the kingdom's blossoming film and entertainment scene. Todd, thank you so much for not only joining us, thank you as well for the new phrase that we're going to coin, which is getting the 966, the intel. Richard, let's rush to the USPTO and trademark this now while Todd is in the desert.
What's the 966, man? What's the 966?
Todd, thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's been a pleasure. You're both very, very kind introduction and outro. And thank you also, Richard, for the very insightful questions and guidance on things. It was a joy.
Well.